I have the pleasure to open this research seminar. We have Susanna Bolz from University of Bremen, who will talk about power of place and do local government interventions accelerates solar PV adoption in Germany. Susanna has now been at WIFO for a research stay for 1 month. I think it's her last, almost 1 month. It's her last week, so if you want to meet her, she has maybe some time left. She's a PhD student and works on her thesis, The Regional Determinants of Environmental Innovation Adoption, and this is her single authored paper. So we're happy to have her. The floor is yours, and Mark will make the discussion after the presentation.
Perfect. So, thanks a lot for the nice introduction and also the possibility to present my research here. As it's already said, this is my single author paper, and this work is part of also a third-party funded project, which is Hybrid. And in Hybrid, we deal with socio-economic, techno-economic analysis around hydrogen adoption. And an important part of hydrogen, or green hydrogen especially, is, of course, renewable energy production. And so this is why in this paper, I'm focusing on renewable energy production. And so I basically had 2 starting points that kind of sparked my interest and why I came up with the idea for this research project overall. So the first one is that we do just have plenty of policy instruments. There's just so much going on. It's really a lot. There's first a diversity of goals. So there are really policy instruments that are more directed towards climate neutrality, but also there are growth policies. A lot of policies are somehow dealing with competition and innovation. And these goals can be contradictory. And I mean, there's a whole lot of research on how policy mixes affect certain things, but there's just a lot of possibilities. And additionally, there's a diversity of types of policy instruments. So in this research project, it's a bit more about, that's why I put it first, about what Schafrin in 2014 called education and outreach policy instrument, where it's really about informing the general public or providing educational resources. But there, of course, are also financial public investment or research and development instruments. And also in the policy instruments, you see instruments that are rather directed towards like a supply intervention, or you have rather demand-oriented policy instruments. These policy instruments also have various degrees of what Schafrin again called technological specificity. So especially in the German discourse, it's a lot talked about like Technologieoffenheit, because policy instruments should not be directed towards a certain technology. And on the other hand, you have policy instruments that can be very specifically directed towards a policy. So for example, in the Renewable Energy Act in Germany, it's clearly not technologieoffen because it's very clearly directed towards renewable energy. And the last point, which is also rather important for this project, is that there are different bodies who can actually implement certain policies. So of course, we do have national regulation, but there are also, I mean, there's just so much going on, and like local authorities can implement a certain policy instrument. There are, again, in Germany, the federal states who can have their own funds and own strategic programs. And that's something which is recognized in literature, but there are not overly many studies on that, because it's always, I mean, these especially local and regional instruments, they are just notoriously hard to measure and hard to get a grasp on. And talking about local and regional levels, this is the second starting point that was influential for this project, is just overall notion that scale and place matter. I mean, they matter for basically anything, but they matter specifically also for sustainability transition, because when it comes to green technology adoption or production, you just almost always you see very pronounced place-specific characteristics. And in the literature, I will talk a bit more about the literature later, but in the literature that's relevant for understanding what's going on, both theoretically and empirically, there are local and regional authorities that are just key actors in sustainability transitions. And on the, kind of in another literature, there's a discussion about the agency of local and regional authorities. First, this is because the principle of subsidiarity, which is local authorities have just some, or in certain areas they have just decision leeway, just because that's the idea of subsidiarity. But you also see different governance modes in different regions. And so I was wondering, okay, but what can local and regional authorities actually do about renewable energy? So how much leeway can they, or what, like from a quantitative perspective, how much leeway do we see they actually have? And so the overall question of this analysis is whether what I call local government interventions, whether they actually affect solar PV adoption in Germany. Three decisions are key. So the first one is the decision to actually analyze solar PV. The idea behind is that it's just an important renewable energy source. It's decentral. It's relatively easy to install. So we can think or assume that many people can and will actually do it. And it's just not, I mean, wind energy is just like a different story to tell, and it's not that capital intense solar PV compared to other renewable energy sources. And also Germany just lags behind their renewable energy goals, and solar PV is just an important part of the story. And you see some regional variation, because I mean, if we wouldn't see any regional variation, wouldn't be probably not too interesting to study that. And then a second important decision I make is to actually focus on energy agencies. Energy agencies can be understood as this education and outreach policy instrument, because it's a lot about providing information, providing counseling, and thus influencing persons and firms in the region. They have a somewhat similar scope across Germany. They further do address innovation adoption. That's something that's of interest to me also, because innovation adoption is just less studied in the literature, again, because of problems with gathering data on that. And the overarching goal of energy agencies is actually to promote renewable energy. So it's likely to assume that they will actually have an impact. And households and organizations are specifically a target audience of these energy agencies. And lastly, I wanted to undertake a quantitative analysis with the data at hand. And today I will focus on the difference analysis, or on the baseline result for that. But I also planned some survival analysis to understand how the energy agencies, or what factors drove the decisions to implement energy agencies. Okay, so. Then again, talking a bit about the conceptual background. I mean, I won't talk too much about the existing empirical results. I mean, it's kind of, if we're talking about especially innovation adoption, it's kind of rather, usual results that there are market-based instruments which are very effective. Firm characteristic also almost always matter. I mean, it just depends whether you have a very pro-environmental CEO in the company or not. And there's another very interesting analysis, specifically in Germany, where they analyzed municipal building codes who actually restricted solar PV, and they also found that as an important driver. When it comes to the literature I'm referring to, these are kind of three different literature strands. So this is first what Hans Meyer in 2021 called the geography of innovation literature. That's strongly influenced by economic geography, but also by innovation economics. And these are often quantitative analysis. And as I already said, studies on innovation production are usually more common than studies on innovation adoption. What's kind of interesting to see there, or what's also important, is that there's a distinction can be made between supply and demand characteristics in the regions, and then between institutional and political characteristics of the region. So it would make it just makes a difference whether like a region is again rather or shows rather pro-environmental characteristics, or not. And what's also usually emphasized in that literature is just an importance of geographical distance for knowledge flows and learning, because knowledge and learning is important. When you know and learn about new technologies, then you rather adopt them. And often made assumption is that the more geographical close you are to the knowledge source, then you are more likely to also absorb that knowledge. Another literature that's quite interesting and which kind of opens up a bit this geographical distance assumption is the literature on the geography of sustainability transition. That's a research trend that's rather influenced by sustainability transitions research. And there was just recent a spatial turn in that literature where it was also emphasized, okay, we should take into account also the difference between different spaces and different places. And what's quite similar is that you also have this importance of knowledge flows and learning processes and networks and actors. And you do have more often qualitative studies, because it's just, I mean, if you want to, or if you kind of conceptually want to think about, okay, how actors interact with the other, it's just naturally that you employ qualitative studies to really get to know how these actors interact. And from that literature strand, I found one concept quite interesting that's, again, informative for understanding how energy agencies work or how they could work. And that's the concept of embeddedness. And embeddedness is a concept that actually conceptualizes how these actors take part in the transition that's happening. So again, the idea behind is that economic decision-making, or also other decision-making, but especially economic decision-making, is just structured by the social, cultural, predictive, cognitive structures that we have, but also that's kind of part of the region. And so the idea is that, again, that there's a bidirectionality, so that first the environment in which we are born and raised and what's important for what we do economically shapes us and our decision-making, but also that actors have the possibility to also shape the environment. So that's another important part, that it's really about a deliberate relation of the actor to the environment. And what's also important, there can be multiple embeddednesses. So, for example, for firms, they are embedded in the region and are just located in a very specific region with a very specific characteristic, but they're at the same time also embedded in their industry, also in their value chains. So that's really the idea, to kind of open up a bit this geographical distance assumption, that it's not only because we are part of a region, we are influenced by the region, but there's some very deliberate strategy to be influenced and to influence. Another literature strand that's important for this research is the literature and innovation systems. That's a research strand that deals with, again, systems of actors and their interactions, and how innovation is produced, again, in a often regional, also technological system. Again, in this literature strand, these are often qualitative studies, and again, you have this focus on innovation production. And from that literature, what's also quite an interesting concept is the concept of intermediaries. And intermediaries are actors that can be from just different backgrounds. So it can be government agencies, but this could also be like a company network, initiative, and advocacy group. Can also be banks. I mean, especially in the macro literature, intermediaries are usually known as banks. And the idea here is that those intermediaries really link the different parts of the system. So they link actors within the system, but they also link certain activities. They can link skills or resources. And again, these intermediaries are a way to understand how knowledge flows actually happen in the system. Because intermediaries, I mean, I wrote it down as perform certain functions in an innovation system, but the functions they do perform or where they facilitate them is really about knowledge flows, about getting people together that work at same things, or linking a person that can install a solar PV to a company that is interested in having one. Okay, so this was about the kind of idea how we can possibly understand what's going on in the regions. Energy agencies are generally funded at all levels. So the most renowned one probably is the International Energy Agency. There are also energy agencies in other European countries. In Germany, we have them at the national, federal, and county level. The first county level energy agency in Germany was founded in 1992 already. And this year, almost 1/4 of all the counties in Germany eventually decided to adopt an energy agency. But you also see that this is a process going on. So I think the last energy agency in Germany was founded just in January this year. As I already said, their scope is quite similar across Germany. So the usual services they provide is really those networking activities, and they also provide information through campaigns, events. They provide certain counseling services. So if you are a company that wants to have a certain project, then you can go to your local energy agency and say, hey, I want to do that. Please help me to somehow understand the super complicated funding system. But they also provide counseling on energy usage. You can gather information about certain measures for energy efficiency or installing renewable energy. And content-wise, energy agencies can set their own kind of flavor or targets, depending on what's going on in the region. But what you see for all of them is either the focus on renewable energies or energy efficiency. And there's really a lot of focus on building modernization for either private households, companies, or also counties and municipalities who say, okay, we have to renovate our buildings, and what can we do? And also the target audience is quite clear-cut. So all of the energy agencies have at least one or all of the target audiences, as mentioned here. What's also important, energy agency is just not anyone can call themselves an energy agency. So you also have a lot of private engineers that provide similar services. For the sake of this paper, I really said, okay, I want to analyze energy agencies that are funded because of the initiative of a county. So to see the energy agency as, again, this deliberate idea of a county, hey, we want to do something, we want to shape the transition, so we install this energy agency. And additionally, at least one, either county, federal, state, or municipality has to be an associate of this energy agency. So that's really both the idea of the county to do that, but it's also financed to the largest amount by public money. This then rules out private organizations, just because it's not of interest for this analysis. Then another criteria is to have the idea that the energy agency has to offer both of the services. I wanted to rule out pure networking activities, or that's something that's ruled out by this definition. Again, because I wanted to see, okay, really this deliberate strategy and networking is a bit hard to see what's done there. And another criteria is that the energy agency has to have an active homepage. So one, it's just for being able to collect the data, but also this kind of reflects a certain minimum level of embeddedness, that the information the agency provides is publicly available and searchable via Google. With that set of criteria, I actually exclude energy agencies that do no longer operate. So during my research, I found two that kind of are excluded by this last idea. So the one was founded, I think, in 2015 and ended to operate just 1.5 years later. And the other agency just really didn't have an active homepage. So that's maybe important for the empirical analysis later. So I really focus on the successful and, so to say, surviving agencies. And it also might be that when researching the energy agencies, that I just might miss some that cease to exist, and I wanted to avoid that. So reflecting on the conceptual background, I understand energy agencies as part of the local institutional environment. It reflects the pro-environmental behavior of the county. There's also some literature interpreting energy agencies as policy innovation itself. The energy agencies are embedded in the regions, first because they reflect the intention to actually promote the energy transition, but also because they cooperate with actors in the regions, and they also depend on the actors in the regions. And in the looking from an innovation perspective angle, they serve as intermediaries because they provide functions such as networking activities, they promote technology adoption, and they raise awareness. So putting all this together, my hypothesis is that the establishment of an energy agency has a positive impact on solar PV installations in Germany. As I already said, there are kind of multiple embeddednesses possible. Organizations are also embedded in industries and value chains. So I would expect that the effect on households of an energy agency is actually stronger than for organizations. But we can also see that later. So the idea is that energy agencies, they show just different levels of embeddedness. And the idea is that the effect is stronger the more embedded an energy agency, or the bigger the energy agency is in terms of employment, which reflects just the financial power that's behind. The data on energy agencies is self-collected, so I used just the Federal Association of Energy Agencies, Orbis, and also the scientific literature to get information where and when the energy agency is funded. I also make in the data a distinction between counties. So counties have offices, the energy agencies have offices in counties, but there are also some counties that are associated to an energy but do not have an own office in the county. So that's also something that's distinguished. I counted the current number of employees, and I also assessed the degree of embeddedness. And the degree of embeddedness depends on who is associated. So is it only the county, or are also companies in the region associated to the energy agency? The second data set is the Core Energy Data Registry. That's where I get information on where all the solar installations are. The data is publicly available, and what's good for such analysis is that also that actually all electricity producing units that are connected to the grid have to be registered. And in principle, it's a really cool data source. What has to be kept in mind that the database itself is only established in 2019. And due to the rules that were set in 2019, entities that are taken off the grid before 2017 are not included in the data set, or there's at least the possibility that they are not included, because in 2019 they said, okay, all the energy producing units that are in or were operating in 2017 have to be registered afterwards again, but entities that just ceased to exist before 2017 are not included in that data. The data available that's used here is just the postal code and capacity of each unit to aggregate it then to the county level. We also know about the type of operator. It's distinguished between private households and organizations. And for the companies, we do have for a certain amount also additional information on the industry, whether it's an SME or not. And for the solar units, we also know what type the solar unit is. Then for the regional covariates used, I just used some rather typical data sources for Germany. So that one is the INCA database, and there's another database for federal elections. Okay. So taken together, when it only comes to the solar installation, I have a balanced panel from 1983 to 2024, when it comes to regional covariance, I ended up with an unbalanced panel 95 to 2024, but I'm working on balancing it a bit more. So I will see how much more data points I will get then. The data is aggregated to the county level, and the important variables are the information on the solar installations in each county and in each year, and the information on the energy agencies. So how does it look? You can, I think it's probably okay. So this is a map that's just the total installed capacity from solar installations in 2024. What you can already see a bit of kind of the usual German pattern. You see it a bit more for the private households, but you do have more solar PV installations, you do have more innovation, you do have more GDP per capita in the south than in the north. And you do have more of those variables in the west than in the east. So that's a rather, really super typical German pattern. What's in this case a bit interesting is that just trying to get that out here. That you do see that you don't see this pattern as clear for the organizations. The driver for that is actually that when it comes to the big open field solar PV installations, there is more space available in the northeast of Germany. So that's really, so the decision of companies to really install this big solar farms in the north and east of Germany, that drives this pattern that you see for the organizations. That's... So just quickly taken together is just the information on the solar installations. What's quite kind of expectable, so 95% of the units that are in the data registry are private households. Only 5% are organizations, but still there are 219,000 organizations in that registry. When it comes to the capacity, 45% of the capacity is installed by private households, the rest by the organizations. We also, as I already said, there are informations available for the organizations, but because the data, the organizations can decide whether they want to make this data publicly available. So we do have a lot of missings here.
Excuse me, just for information. These are counts. These are not square meters. Right?
These are counts. Yeah.
So organizations could have rather big areas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So this is the number of each. So in the upper table, the numbers you see. So each actor gets a unique ID across the data registry. So that's just the number of unique IDs for private households and organization that's given. Additionally, we see the, just as I already mentioned, the type of solar that's installed. And what we see here that, again, when it comes to capacity and also the number, most solar installations are really on what they call building services. So that's the classical rooftop solar PV you get. And the ground mounted sites, open land, this is what I mentioned, that's kind of the big solar farms that are plugged on the northeast of Germany. Then when it comes to the energy agencies, again, you see this rather usual pattern. You do have more energy agencies in the west than in the east, and in the south than in the north. When it comes to the timing of the funding of an energy agency, I would say there are some kind of early adopters in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Then you have in this, you can't see it. Yeah, then you have in the middle part from around here to around here, you have this kind of expansion phase, and then since 2014, you really see that energy agencies are adopted in further and further counties. When it comes to the, as I already said, I think with respect to time, I'm going to skip that. We can discuss that maybe later. I think that makes more sense. These are just some information on the regions. When it comes to the empirical setup, I decided to go for a difference in differences approach with the idea that energy agencies can be understood as treatment. In that specific context, it's a staggered treatment because treated countries are just treated at different levels. So it would be super easy if just in 2000, everyone would have funded the energy agency. It's not the case. So it's, you just cannot go with the usual diff approach just because of the results can be biased in case you have those different treatment timings. In the recent years, there have been some approaches developed to actually account for these differences in timing. And for this analysis, I decided to go with the Sun and Abraham estimation. What has to be kept in mind with all the alternatives and different methods, I mean, it's not yet super clear which one is best in which setting, and also the results are quite similar mostly. I will just go quickly into the intuition behind what's going on. The idea is that all the counties who have one adoption year, they belong to one cohort. So we'd say all the counties that decided to have an energy agency in 2000 belong to the cohort 2000. And then you have a standard two-way fixed effects model, but you include interaction terms between the cohorts, so let's say the year 2000, and the relative time to adoption. So for example, there is a county that founded an energy agency in 2000, and then you have, let's say, a value of newly installed capacity for the year 2002. And then for this year, you would have the interaction effect between relative time to adoption plus 2 years and the cohort year adoption in 2000. So basically you end up with a two-way fixed effect with just a lot of interaction effects. And then for each, or the coefficient for each relative time to adoption and the cohort, you get a single estimate. And these estimates are then weighted across the cohorts, again, with the idea to reflect that in certain years, more energy agencies could be funded, so just to account for the differences. In that setting, the cohorts are compared to the never treated counties. And the always treated counties are excluded. So if you recall the pedal I have, so there was this one energy agency in 1992. If I include regional covariates, then that county is actually excluded because the timing of adoption is before the setting. Some core assumptions are that you do have parallel trends only for the treated cohorts, not for the never treated. And another core assumption that's also rather important in this setting is that you do not have anticipation effects. Yeah, that's something we might possibly also discuss later, because there you could argue that it's actually violated. I just wanted to give you the key takeaways from these preliminary results. So what I do see is that there's actually robust positive effect of the energy agency treatment on the, again, absolute number of units and newly installed capacity solar installations for each year. As expected, this effect is stronger for private households than for organizations. And I also have distinguished between organizations in total and not energy organizations to exclude this, big solar farms. Yeah, these effects are rather similar. What I also do see is that the results do not hold for when I take the density and per capita values as dependent variable. And I also had another Callaway's and Anna specification, and the results there are also similar. So this is then the regression result you see. I mean, not all. So on the left, you always have the newly installed or the effect or the regression results for newly installed capacity. And in the middle, you always see the effects or the regression results for the newly installed capacitor only for the private households, and on the right for the organizations. And what you, basically see here is that you see this positive result, positive and significant. What's a bit also nice to see, if you have this different studies, you can create nice plots. Okay, now it's going. And what you additionally see here, as I already mentioned, the idea is that if you have the parallel trends assumptions, I mean, we can also, when it comes to the testing parallel trends assumption, I mean, it's usually recommended to look at the plots first. You can also do additional tests. Right now, I just have the plots. You could discuss whether we say it's violated or not, but I do see some results. The picture is a bit more clear for the private households. And here just that the effect is a bit smaller. And you do see for the organizations a rather similar pattern than if you look at the capacity in total. So it seems that when you look at the capacity in total, these results are largely driven by the patterns for organizations, and that you see a more clear pattern for the private households, which again, in this whole setting, kind of makes sense, because you would assume that private households are also a bit more responsive to things that are happening in regions. And again, organizations, I mean, they just have like also a different logic of using the solar PV, just because a lot of it's driven by industry and also the value chains they're embedded in and their financial scope. Then I had a look at the kind of rooftop and facade solar. What you see here is that the results are quite, again, super similar. Just keep in mind that in this plot, the psi or the y-axis has a different scale, just because there is less rooftop solar. But again, the pattern is quite similar. Here and lastly, I just compared organizations and non-energy organizations. Again, you have a rather similar pattern. I think we can skip that. Next step. So these is kind of, as I already said, it's these are just the preliminary results. There are some next steps, of course, planned. So, and that analysis, the information on the embeddedness is not as included as I would wish for it. So that's something I'm planning to take a bit more into account. I also want to take into account spatial dependencies. That's also something that hasn't happened yet. And as I already mentioned in the beginning, I also plan for some survival analysis to really see, okay, why do counties fund these energy agencies? First look seems that at least the energy agency is not funded because they have or a high number of solar installations already in the region. And something that I originally planned to include in that paper, I will have to decide whether I really do it, is actually to compare that to another federal program with a slightly different angle that's directed, but that's again a federal program that's directed towards municipalities and counties. That's it from my side. Thank you for your attention. And I'm happy to get questions.
Well, I'll start. Thank you for an insight. You successfully linked the existence of energy agencies to the installation of photovoltaics using a sophisticated econometric method. Unfortunately, it's not my expertise. In the room, we have more capable persons that might give useful comments on that. However, I have one more question. Namely, in your approach, where are the subsidies or the tax cuts? Do they play a role in this analysis, or why do they not play a role?
So that's something I'm thinking about kind of since the beginning of the project. So one thing with the subsidies and tax cuts, is that it's again a data source that's notoriously hard to get, because you also see in Germany and especially for the feed-in tariffs, that's really where you have a bunch of literature, they matter. What you see is that the structure of the feed-in tariffs just changed a lot over the years, and it's then hard to get good data on that. And it's also so that's data part. The more important part, I think, is that it's a German-wide regulation, and it applies to all of the counties at the kind of in a similar scope. And so it shouldn't matter too much for this analysis also, because I include the county and fixed effects. So we should be fine, but yeah.
I'll open the round, please.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to speak? I don't know how many. I have a number of questions and a few comments, and I don't know which fits into which category. Basically, I'm wandering through the different setup. You have a long discussion about the concepts and the mediating variables and the causal mechanisms. And you said it yourself, in your different analysis, you have one dummy, many dummy variables, but nothing that reflects the causal mechanism. That's by the nature of the method. Yeah? So that's no criticism, but the advice there is to spend extra time on clarifying the causal mechanisms. Mm-hmm. Yeah? This can be done. One way is to look whether your hypotheses work out. Mm-hmm. But you can also look for alternative data sets that maybe support your hypothesis, and sometimes even scant evidence in the direction of your mechanisms will make your paper much more convincing if you can at least show, something that supports your hypothesis works out. The second one is on the diff in diff is very restrictive in terms of the identifications things. And the two assumptions, the SUTWA is always debatable. Yeah? So are the untreated really untreated? Or I'm not going to go into this because I think that's always a debate. But in this case, it's, you have to assume that nothing else happens in all the treatment period. Nothing else that drives the trends apart. And you are covering the period where environment was discovered in a way. So a lot of actions take place, and probably most of them with more power behind it in terms of finances than these agencies that, if I understood well, are basically sort of, without mocking them, but they are more on the touchy-feely side of the policy. And then you get 2,000 additional units planted into somewhere because of this measure. So I'm wondering about the size of your coefficient, and I'm wondering whether the size of your coefficient is not due to the fact that the other things were going on in these regions, and that regions that perhaps were very conscious of their environmental problems put in these agencies. So I'm thinking that the agencies may be correlated with other more financially support-oriented support that has come forth from the regions. Mm-hmm. I don't know the German system. In Austria, the federal states have the possibility to financially support solar panels with subsidies, and these subsidies vary hugely among provinces. Mm-hmm. And I would expect that in Austria, a federal state with high subsidies would also be more likely to found an agency. So here my advice would be also check the possibility or the plausibility, the viability of alternative identification mechanisms. One that I take a great liking with, because it sort of is one that at least in some way can also account for unobservables, would be synthetic control groups. Be aware, so for synthetic control groups, you need long time series.
Yeah.
The central argument that will come up if you submit the paper is, do you have long enough time periods? But so this somehow has to be resolved in a way to feel good. Then the last comment that I had is your effects level up. They're quite sizable, in fact. I think they are really quite sizable, given that really what we are doing is we are talking to people and trying to convince them of the profitability of doing this stuff. But they level off after a few years. And that's, of course, because you have the annual effect. So next to the annual effect, I would be interested in the cumulative effect, because that's going to be really big. If for 5 years I have 2,000 more, or 2,700 or something, then actually I have 10,000 more solar panels. I'm a little bit also, of course, but you're fully aware of that, in absolute numbers, and then that once you do it per capita, the significance disappears. It could be the sign of some selection bias, maybe bigger regions do it more, or outliers, anything. Yeah, could be a lot of things. But those would be the three sort of, and I don't know whether there are questions or comments, but I'd like to, I wanted to pose, do those comments, maybe to see your reaction to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thanks for your comments, questions whatsoever. So one with the synthetic control groups, I was also thinking about that. It's just kind of was also a decision to start with that, see some first results, and then look where it's going. Another thing that's maybe important, so okay, we can discuss effect sizes also with the densities. That was also something where I do not fully understand where it's coming from. Another thing is that, of course, I would say that large subsidies, especially the feed-in tariffs, they are just really super important also, especially in Germany. But that's also not really part of my question, because my question is really, given that what's going on at the national level, okay, can some, what I call regional governing intervention, can they in that context make a difference? And that's, I mean, these are also not really big. I mean, the energy agencies have somewhat between 1 and 20 employees, so I wouldn't expect to have like a huge effect out of rather small agency, but still would, or my idea is it would matter for also countries to decide, okay, what do they do or not, or also to get a bit of grasp on whether such agencies are effective. And another thing is just that a lot of analysis on that are qualitative, and they really have interesting results. But I was also wondering, okay, but is it again case specific, or do you see that they are such interventions are effective also when you look at that from a quantitative standpoint?
But you're aware, my argument is that I'm not interested. It's uninteresting. I understand what the finances are doing, but my argument is that this financial support is correlated, positively correlated with the appearance of an agency. And so it's a missing control in a way.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe a graph alone will convince me completely that I'm completely wrong.
Yeah.
Just very small comment. What would also be interesting would be the initial PV capacity, because maybe it's a company that has already had many initiatives on that, and others may not have had that much.
Just following up on that, I also think certain of those and most of the energy agencies probably only pop up after there is already some change, some movement going on, right? And I was wondering how you would take this into account, because it goes along with this correlation, because it's not like they come and this is the treatment that now people start doing PV.
Yeah. So that's something that I'm also thinking about how to kind of address that also in like a good way. Right now, I would also say that I have to discuss that a bit more, because the assumption is kind of, that's also that, or not, it's not the assumption. I don't have yet found a good way to actually measure what's going on in the regions that could drive that. So that's, but that's something I also want to address. And my idea was actually to look, that's why I thought about, looking into this kind of survival analysis to see what's happening before energy agencies are founded. But I have to work on that.
Maybe I missed it, but there was this graph where you go how many agencies actually were founded around the years, and there was one year where it spiked like pretty substantially, right? And I was wondering why, and like for me, I think that's actually, or for me it would be nice to have like an explanation. Why is the case?
That's Rheinland-Pfalz, actually, because that's also, I haven't decided on yet how to deal with that. So Rheinland-Pfalz is a bit of a different case, because they do have energy agencies, but it was more of a kind of federal state decision to install them in the counties. And I'm just as of now unsure whether I should say, okay, I leave it out, I say they are treated, I say they are not treated, but that's basically in this region going on.
So can we say that all these counties in Rheinland-Pfalz, they accidentally got treatment? They never chose it?
Could be, yeah.
So are they a good treatment group? If we can make that claim plausibly, we can say they never wanted this, or, this was dropped on their heads. Then you have sort of a randomization, no?
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, it could also be worth exploring that, yeah.
Your argument, I think this could help.
Yeah.
So it may be a very interesting case if it's imposed on them.
Yeah.
Because that way it's not a decision variable, not
No,
at
it's
least
not.
their own
Absolutely
decision
not.
variable. Yeah? And that makes endogeneity less of a problem.
That's, yeah.
Maybe a minor remark, but also looking at this graph, I was wondering about the differences in solar potential across Germany, if you counted for that, because I'll also say maybe in the south the potential is a bit higher, so also the adoption might be higher.
That's also something I was thinking about. Again, that's a bit of a data problem, because I didn't really find a good source on, that's the solar potential, because also, so there is literature who estimate the solar potential for, I don't know what the last year, I think maybe 2023 or so, and you then have like a state of this is the solar potential. The problem is the solar potential actually changes over the years, depending on how many buildings are there, etc. So that's, again, rather a matter of having, a data problem.
Can you show again the graph with the relative time, the first result graph? Yes, back the graph.
The graph?
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
This is actually a very interesting story, because it appears
very far from the treatment. Actually, they were on a higher growth path than the comparison regions, no? Then they have this shock of an energy agency, which depresses actually their investment in solar capacity, and then they get back to the original level, or depending on the result, actually they slow down. So I don't know, but the pre-treatment evolution is very interesting, and I'm not sure if this is related to the subsidy question, but if you think about funding schemes, no, very often they say, okay, we stop for this year, maybe we run out of money or so. We restart with a completely new funding, subsidy, energy agency scheme in the next year, and this is when your results start to pop up. So it's actually quite confusing why those which were doing were installing much more capacity than the comparison group, why they would start to decrease installation prior to the introduction of the agents.
Yeah, no, thanks for the comment. Unfortunately, I don't have yet a really good answer to that. I must just admit, the only thing is that seems to be that it's like a pattern more driven by the organizations. Yeah, that's something I would want to work on, because I also don't quite have a good story to tell about what's going on there. That's always, yeah, not so nice. Yeah.
Do you know for the organization which sector?
So I know it for the, so what's it again? I think for 60% of the organizations I know it. Oh, no, it's a bit more. So yeah, 16% of the organizations I don't have the information. For the rest, I have the NACE 4-digit, I think. So
I don't think it can be completely followed, but maybe it's also interesting to look after this research into, okay, are there certain industries that are more interested in installing? Because I guess also some have more rooftops. Or
yeah, no, thanks.
Okay, we have time for one more question. If not, then thank you.
Yeah, thank you.